It's the beginning of my speech, and here's my audience. All right, David.
Hey.
Good.
Hello. Hello. Governor.
Imagine, in the background, imagine for just 1 second, the sound of gunfire, the sound of cannon fire, the sound of a new world, the sound of a new superpower coming into place, coming into the world and trying to make its difference. This is the sound of the late Enlightenment era, an era that created the birth of many nations and created many revolutionaries in the process. How the United States was founded came down to a few men with a vision, a few men that were inspired by the ideas of revolution and the ideas of change. Men like George Washington, Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson, who together formed the most powerful nation in the modern world, the United States. Militias were a common practice in the early United States history. Militias before the Revolutionary War were commonly used to fight off Native Americans and to fight off early invading British troops. Local militias were formed by leaders from the 13 colonies and leaders from the Revolution. The term militia was recognized by the colonial government in the early 1770s, 5 years prior to the Revolutionary War. The Second Amendment of the United States Constitution, an amendment that protects all citizens the right to keep and bear arms and to form local militias, was one of the most important founding principles that our founding fathers viewed as important. Here I have a visual of the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free man, and the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And in this image here, I have a picture of a militia in the Civil War. Both the Union and the Confederacy utilized small arms groups that were not official parts of their military, but were used to defend their homelands, the northern states and the Union, the northern states and the southern states. They were also commonly used in contested territory to help protect either army's goal. America did not have a formal military at its early founding. The Continental Army was the earliest military that we had. So the majority of the fighting against the British in the Revolutionary War came down to farmers, small business owners, anyone that knew how to utilize a firearm, a musket at the time, or a flintlock pistol effectively. These men were utilized to defend their hometowns, to defend the 13 colonies, and fight alongside the Continental Army in the Revolutionary War. On June 17th, 1775, the Battle of Bunker Hill began. A lot of historians compare the Battle of Bunker Hill to the American Thermopylae, where 1,000 American troops successfully fought off a large-scale British invasion at Bunker Hill. While the Americans did lose the third engagement, and there were 3 separate engagements, while the Americans lost the third and most important engagement, the British Army suffered tremendous losses and had to retreat for an extended period of time. The Militia Act of 1792 was created to establish a National Guard. This was a direct response to the growing concern of foreign affairs, the growing concern of disasters, and to help build this young nation. Some historians argue what the Militia Act of 1772 really created. The Militia Act of 1772 indirectly created the modern-day National Guard. Then this act gave the president the power to utilize state militias and local militias to defend the people in times of disaster and invasion, which is similar to the mission of the National Guard today. And it is important to remember that the Second Amendment did not create the National Guard. The Second Amendment guarantees the people the right to form a militia. Even today, we see the Second Amendment creating small militia groups of men that defend their communities and protect from the tyranny of government. Here I have a visual of the Militia Act of 1792. This, of course, shows the original 13 colonies. This, of course, shows the original 13 colonies as the United States was not quite established modern day. This time, this shows that President George Washington and how well they voted. 262 voted yes, while 67 voted no in favor of the Militia Act of 1792. This is one of the early logos of the National Guard. And it is also important to remember that the National Guard, while some argue is a militia, is not in itself. It is a separate military entity, and not a military force run by the people. So militias, the Second Amendment, and the National Guard today. Today, modern militias have been on the rise in recent years. Groups like the Oath Keepers. These men are made up of former and current law enforcement, former and current military, firefighters, and emergency responders. These men have seen recent action. In the last 5 or so years, defending businesses, homes, and private property from the Ferguson rioters, from rioters in general in the recent years. The Second Amendment has been the point of many debates, as you all know. The Second Amendment, its context has been debated, the purpose of militias has been debated, and the purpose of the federal government and its role with the Second Amendment has been debated. It is important to know that our founding fathers were well aware of the changes and the technological advances that would come with firearms, as a lot of people have debated recently. The founding fathers knew that weapons would become more advanced. They knew that there were weapons capable of firing multiple rounds in a minute, and they even had some of these early automatic weapons. The National Guard, like I said, was created from the Militia Act of 1792, formally, and this gave the president the power to utilize local militias in the events of a national disaster or an invasion, which fortunately the United States has not seen a major invasion in recent years. The most recent being the Pearl Harbor attack. And here I have two political cartoons. I figured I'd show you this. Shows the modern day politician debating the context of the Second Amendment, and Thomas Jefferson being obvious and saying that no free man shall bear the use to bear arms. And here is a political cartoon that raises the question, the context, and how this political cartoon shows that how the context has been debated. A well-regulated militia being referenced to the National Guard, how some people reference the National Guard, and how they reference state troopers and other forces. And then let's talk about the context of the Second Amendment, that some people worry that any psychopath can go purchase a firearm. So why are Americans free? It comes down to the brave men and women that are currently serving and have served in our military, and the founding fathers and their brave influence to fight a tyrannical government, to stand up for a truly free world. The Continental Army and local militias created this country, and it will be those same men and those that are similar that will help preserve freedom for generations to come. Thank you.
Very good.